Molten aluminum doesn't forgive, and it definitely doesn't read Six Sigma manuals. My name is Curtis Swenson. I'm 62 years old, and for 41 of those years, I ran the Alcoa die casting floor in Cleveland, Ohio. Specifically, the floor that forges the AN/APG-68 radar system bulkheads for the F-16 Fighting Falcon. A piece of metal so critical, so unforgiving in its tolerances, that the Department of Defense gave it its own special classification. They gave me one too. 2 days before the humiliation, I was watching Pour 7. The G-forces an F-16 pulls can find a microscopic air bubble in a structural cast and turn it into a catastrophic failure at 20,000 feet. My job was to make sure that never happened. I did it by sight, by sound, by the smell of the hydraulic fluid in the press. I did it with knowledge that lived in my hands, not on a flowchart. Then came Cameron Ashby. He stood in my office doorway, a space that still smelled faintly of the cutting oil and ozone I'd known my whole life. He didn't enter. He just leaned against the frame, holding a manila envelope. He was 27. I knew this because he'd mentioned it during his introductory town hall, a presentation filled with words like paradigm shift and digital transformation. He wore a crisp Armani suit that probably cost more than the transmission I'd just put in my 1990 Jeep Cherokee. On his feet were a pair of gleaming white leather sneakers. "Kurt," he said, not as a greeting, but as a summons. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the framed photo on my wall, the one of the founding team from 1952. Men in greasy overalls, smiling, tough as the dies they forged. He stepped inside. The air changed, filled with the scent of some expensive cologne that smelled like lemons and money. He placed the envelope on my desk, right next to the silver pen Old Man Hemlock had given me when I first made foreman. "We're moving in a new direction, Kurt," he said, his voice flat, rehearsed. "A realignment of assets. The board has approved a full implementation of Lean Six Sigma methodologies across all legacy departments." I just looked at him. Legacy departments. That was me. I was a legacy. "Your role," he continued, finally meeting my gaze with eyes that held the empty confidence of a man who had never failed at anything because he'd never built anything, "is being optimized." Optimization. I'd spent 41 years, 2 months, and 8 days at this plant. I started sweeping metal shavings for $2.30 an hour. I'd given this company my youth, my hearing, and more 80-hour weeks than I could count. My wife, Mary, had passed away 6 years ago, and I knew, deep down, a part of the distance between us in those final years was forged right here on this concrete floor. I had sacrificed my life for this place. And now, this kid was optimizing me. A dead calm settled over me. It's a feeling I recognized from my time in the Navy, on a destroyer in the North Atlantic. The moment before the storm hits, when the sea goes flat and the air gets heavy. It isn't fear. It's clarity. "I see," I said. My voice sounded distant, even to me. "The company appreciates your many years of service," he recited from a script he held in his head. He pushed the envelope an inch closer. "Inside, you'll find the details of your severance package. It's quite generous. We'll also be providing outplacement services." He had hands that had never held anything heavier than a latte. Soft, manicured hands. He gestured vaguely toward the door. "HR will need your badge and keys. You have 20 minutes to collect your personal items." He turned to leave, his part in the play finished. He thought he was cutting dead weight. He didn't realize he was cutting the brake lines. What he didn't understand was that the Alcoa Cleveland plant didn't just make parts for the F-16. It was, for all intents and purposes, the only place on Earth that could make these specific parts. And the reason for that wasn't in a corporate database. It wasn't in a blueprint file stored on a server. It was standing right in front of him. If you love stories about underdogs who refuse to stay down, and the sweet justice that comes when experience meets arrogance, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Back in 1988, there was an incident. A hairline fracture in a bulkhead led to a structural failure during a high-G maneuver on a training flight over Nevada. The pilot ejected safely, but the Air Force and the DOD came down on Alcoa like a ton of bricks. The contract, worth over $80 million a year back then, was on the line. The problem was the die itself, an old piece of H-13 tool steel we called the Beast. It was cantankerous. It had memory. It expanded 0.5 of an inch more on humid days, and you had to compensate for it in the preheat cycle, something no manual ever recorded. I was 28 years old, a junior foreman. Old Man Hemlock was the master caster then. He was a legend, a man who could diagnose an impending hydraulic failure by the vibrations he felt through the soles of his Red Wing boots. He and I spent 3 straight weeks sleeping on cots in the office, living on coffee and sandwiches from Murphy's Diner. We analyzed metallurgic reports, checked temperature logs, and mostly we just watched the Beast. We listened to it. "This machine talks, Curtis," Hemlock told me one night, his face lit by the orange glow of the furnace. "You just have to learn its language. These new engineers, they look at the numbers. They don't look at the steel." He was right. The breaking point came from a combination of alloy temperature and injection pressure that was, on paper, perfectly within spec. But the Beast had a sweet spot, a tiny window of operation that produced a flawless cast every single time. A window I found on the 14th day, at 3 a.m., by adjusting the pressure by a mere 50 psi from the documented standard. We poured a test batch of 10. They were perfect, flawless under X-ray, ultrasound, and magnetic particle inspection. The DOD was so relieved and so spooked that they created a new addendum to our production contract. Article 4, Paragraph 2. It stated that for all legacy die systems predating 1990, specifically for flight-critical components, a final physical inspection and signature of authorization were required for every batch released for shipment. This authorization could only be granted by a federally certified master die caster who had undergone a specific, on-site qualification process for those exact dies. When Hemlock retired in 1999, I was the only one he had trained to his standard. The DOD sent their certification team. I spent a week with them, demonstrating my knowledge of the Beast, of its moods and its language. At the end of it, they handed me a laminated card with my photo and a long string of numbers. I was now the sole signatory for the F-16 bulkhead program, the critical casting authorization holder. It was a formality, mostly, a piece of paper in a file. But it was a piece of paper that tied me, Curtis Swenson, directly to the operational readiness of half the Air Force's fighter fleet. I took my time packing. There wasn't much. The photo of the founding team, my coffee mug, stained brown from decades of use, the silver Parker pen from Hemlock. I left the company service awards in the trash. I walked past Cameron's office on the way out. He had his feet up on his desk, talking loudly on his phone, laughing. He had a framed MBA from Harvard on the wall. It was very new. I dropped my keycard and badge on the HR manager's desk. She was a woman named Brenda, who I'd known for 30 years. She wouldn't meet my eye. "I'm sorry, Kurt," she mumbled, staring at her keyboard. "It's just business, Brenda," I said. As I walked through the parking lot to my old Cherokee, a feeling of strange lightness came over me. For the first time since I was a teenager, my time was my own. The weight of the 3 a.m. calls, the stress of meeting impossible deadlines, the constant pressure of knowing a mistake on my part could cost a pilot his life. It was gone. All of it, lifted by a 27-year-old in leather sneakers. He probably tweeted about it, or whatever they do now. I got in the Jeep. It smelled of old vinyl and gasoline, the smell of freedom. I turned the key, and the straight-six engine rumbled to life, a familiar, honest sound. I didn't look back at the plant. I just drove. The first week, I did nothing. I slept until the sun was up. I sat on my back porch and drank my coffee, watching the squirrels fight over the bird feeder. I visited Mary's grave, told her what had happened. It felt like a confession that I was finally free from the place that had owned me for so long. Then I started on the canoe. It was a project I'd been planning for a decade. A cedar strip canoe, built by hand. I'd bought the plans, the wood, the epoxy years ago. It had all been sitting in my garage, waiting for a someday that I never thought would come. Now, it was here. There is a purity to working with wood. It's honest. It doesn't lie. You can't bully it. You have to understand the grain, respect its properties. It was like working with the beast, in a way. It had a language. I spent hours in my workshop, the scent of cedar filling the air. Each strip had to be perfectly beveled, perfectly fitted. It was slow, methodical work. It was calming. I knew for sure 3 weeks ago. That's when the first call came. It was from Dave Miller, the lead foreman on the day shift, a good man I'd trained myself. His number showed up on my phone while I was fairing the hull of the canoe, sanding it smooth. "Kurt, it's Dave. Hope I'm not bothering you." He sounded tired. "Never, Dave. What's on your mind?" "It's this new system, the Ashby kid. He's got us logging everything on these new tablets, every temperature, every pressure reading. He says the data will drive optimization, but the rejection rate is climbing." I stayed quiet. "It's the little things, Kurt. The stuff you always did. You'd tweak the cooling cycle by 10 seconds on a hot day. You'd hold the injection for an extra half second if you heard a flutter in the pump. This kid says that's unscientific. He says we have to follow the Six Sigma process exactly. No deviations." "And how's that working out?" I asked, running my hand over the smooth cedar. "We're at 4% rejections. 4. We were at 0.5 with you. He's blaming it on us, on resistance to change." He held a 2-hour meeting about embracing the new paradigm. I could picture it perfectly. Cameron, standing in front of a PowerPoint presentation, pointing at charts that had nothing to do with the reality of molten metal. "Just follow the procedure, Dave," I said. "Give him exactly what he asks for. Document everything." "But Kurt..." "Document everything," I repeated, a little harder this time. "Make sure you have a paper trail for every decision he makes. Every single one." There was a pause. Then, "I understand, Kurt. I get it. Be good." He hung up. I went back to my sanding. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the animal to walk into it. Here's what Cameron Ashby didn't know. He believed that manufacturing was a science that could be perfected on a spreadsheet. He saw the institutional knowledge of men like me as an obstacle, a bug in the system to be patched out. But what he hadn't realized was that some systems are not built on code. They are built on experience. The knowledge required to run the beast wasn't written down in some dusty binder. It couldn't be. It was a living thing, passed from one mastercaster to the next. Hemlock gave it to me, and I was supposed to give it to Dave. But Cameron had fired the library and burned the books. The breaking point came in the 5th week. Another call from Dave. This time, his voice was tight with stress. "They're all cracking, Kurt. An entire batch. 40 bulkheads, all showing microfractures under X-ray. 40. That's a $1.2 million scrap heap." What did Ashby say? He brought in a consultant, some guy with another MBA. They spent a day looking at data streams. Their conclusion? Inconsistent alloy heating. They want to replace the furnace thermocouples. I almost laughed. The thermocouples were fine. It wasn't the heat. It was the timing. The beast needed to be fed at the precise peak of its heat cycle, a moment you could feel more than you could measure. The digital readouts were too slow. They told you where the temperature had been, not where it was going. The DOD liaison is here, Dave said, his voice dropping to a whisper. A colonel. He's not happy. The next shipment is due in 2 weeks. If we miss it, the F-16 line at Fort Worth goes down. Keep documenting, Dave, I said, and stay out of the blast radius. The canoe was nearly finished. I was applying the first coat of epoxy resin, a clear, honey-thick liquid that brought out the deep, rich colors of the cedar. It was a delicate process. You had to work fast, but with a steady hand. No second chances. The workshop was quiet, save for the gentle scrape of my spreader. It was peaceful. The call I was waiting for came on a Tuesday morning, 62 days after I'd been optimized. It was an unknown number with a corporate exchange. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. Hello? Is this Curtis Swenson? The voice was strained, high-pitched. It was Cameron Ashby. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, naked panic. I didn't say anything. I just kept brushing the epoxy onto the hull, a long, smooth stroke. Mr. Swenson, it's Cameron Ashby, from Alcoa. I know who you are, I said calmly. Look, we have a situation here, a critical production issue with the Falcon project. We can't seem to get a viable cast. The rejection rate is 100%. I could hear the frantic energy in his office. Phones ringing, people talking in clipped, urgent tones. The sound of a world coming apart. That sounds like a problem, I said, my voice neutral. Yes, it is. A huge problem. The DOD is... They're talking about pulling the contract. We've tried everything. New thermocouples, recalibrating the injectors. We even analyzed the alloy composition. Nothing works. I dipped my brush back in the pot of resin. You have a Harvard MBA. You have 6 Sigma. You have consultants. I'm sure you'll figure it out. There was a sputtering sound on the other end of the line. Please, Mr. Swenson, I'm asking for your help. We need you to come in. Just for a day. As a consultant. We'll pay you, of course. A very generous rate. This was the moment. The pivot point. He still thought this was about a technical glitch. He still thought he was in charge. That he was extending a generous offer to the help. He hadn't yet realized that he was standing on a trap door, and my hand was on the lever. I don't think I can help you, Cameron, I said. I'm retired now. I'm building a canoe. A canoe? He squeaked, the word foreign in his mouth. Mr. Swenson, the F-16 production line is going to shut down. This is a matter of national security. It was a matter of national security 2 months ago, too, I said. But you weren't too concerned about it then. A desperate silence. I could hear him breathing, the ragged sound of a man drowning in consequences. What do you want? He finally whispered. I don't want anything, I said honestly. I'm perfectly happy. There's something else, he stammered. The lawyers found it. In the DOD contract. Some old addendum. Article 4, Paragraph 2. It's about a final authorization signature. For every shipment. It has to be signed by a certified master caster. He finally found the kill switch. That's right, I said. We can't find the certification records in the system. HR has nothing. But the DOD, they have a name. They have your name. They said you're the only one on the list. The only one in the country. Is that true? I took a slow breath, savoring the smell of cedar and epoxy. The smell of victory. The authorization is tied to the man, Cameron, not the company, I said. It's my qualification. It's non-transferable. The line went completely silent. The full weight of the situation, the elegant, simple, and brutal reality of it was finally landing on him. He hadn't just fired an old man. He had decapitated the entire program. He had grounded the United States Air Force with a manila envelope. So, you can't ship, he said, his voice a ghost. even if we made a perfect part. We can't ship it without you. That's about the size of it, I confirmed. Looks like you optimized yourself into a corner. He started begging then, a pathetic, rambling torrent of words. He offered me my job back. He offered me a raise, a bonus, a new title. He talked about the company, about the team, about his own future. It was disgusting. He had the power to ruin a man's life with a 5-minute meeting, but no capacity to accept the outcome of his own decisions. I let him talk himself out. When he was done, panting into the phone, I said, "I told you, Cameron, I'm retired." "There must be something," he pleaded. "Name a price, any price." I looked at my canoe. The hull was gleaming, a perfect seamless sheath of wood and resin. It was a beautiful thing, built with patience and skill. Something real. "I might be convinced to come out of retirement," I said slowly. "But my consulting fee is steep." "How steep?" he asked, hope flooding his voice. 100,000? 200? $5 million, I said. Dead silence again. Not the silence of shock this time, but the silence of a man doing impossible math in his head. 5 million? That's the fee for my expertise and for the use of my federal authorization for the remainder of the contract term, renewable in 5 years. It's a one-time payment, wire transfer. It has to be in my account before I set foot on company property. That's impossible. The board would never approve it. The board can approve it, or they can explain to the Pentagon why they can no longer produce parts for America's frontline fighter jet. The math on that is pretty simple. A $5 million fee versus losing a contract worth over $160 million a year. I'm sure your Harvard MBA can handle that calculation. He was quiet for a long time. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, the denial fighting with the inevitable. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, I'll take it to the board. 5 million. "We're not done," I said. The epoxy was starting to set. I had to finish this last section. "There's more. There's one more condition. It's non-negotiable." "What is it?" I set my brush down and picked up a clean rag to wipe my hands. I looked out the garage door at the clear blue sky. It was a good day to build a canoe. "I want your job," I said. "Not your title. Your actual job. When I arrive, I want to see your termination paperwork. Signed. I want to see you packing your things. I want to see a security guard escorting you to your car." This time, the silence was different. It was the sound of a man's world collapsing into a singularity. He had tried to erase me, to optimize me out of existence. Now, I was erasing him. "You can't do that," he breathed. "I'm not doing it." "You are," I said. "You're going to walk into the CEO's office and explain to him that the only way to save the company's single most important defense contract is to fire you and hire me back on my terms. You're going to be the author of your own optimization." He didn't respond. He couldn't. "The offer is good for 1 hour, Cameron," I said, my voice as cold and hard as a freshly machined die. "You have 60 minutes to save the F-16 program. The clock is ticking." And then I hung up. I went back to my canoe. The resin was perfect. The surface was like glass. 47 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was the CEO, Robert Vance, a man I respected, but who had let this happen. He'd been too busy looking at quarterly reports to pay attention to the men on his factory floor. "Kurt," he said, his voice heavy. "It's Bob Vance." "Bob," I acknowledged. "I have Cameron Ashby's letter of resignation on my desk. I've just spoken to the board. We've approved your terms. The 5 million is being wired to your account as we speak. It should be there within the hour." "And my new contract?" I asked. "Our legal team is drafting it now. Director of Legacy Manufacturing and Special Projects. Full autonomy over the Cleveland Casting Division. Reports directly to me. Is that acceptable?" "It is," I said. "Good," He sighed. It was a sound of immense relief. Can you be here tomorrow morning? I'll be there at 7, I said. And Bob, one more thing. Anything, Kurt. Tell security to have Cameron Ashby off the property before I arrive. I don't want to see him. Consider it done, Vance said. Welcome back, Kurt. The next morning, I drove my old Cherokee into the employee parking lot and pulled into my old spot, the one marked Foreman. I walked through the doors I had first entered as a boy of 21. The security guard at the front desk, a young man who wasn't even born when I started here, handed me a new badge. It didn't say Foreman. It said Director. Dave Miller and the rest of the old crew were waiting for me on the casting floor. They didn't cheer or applaud. That wasn't their way. They just nodded. A few of them smiled. It was a quiet, profound welcome. It was everything I needed. Good to have you back, boss, Dave said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm. Good to be back, Dave, I said. Let's go talk to the beast. I imagine it's been lonely. I walked to my old office. It had been cleared out. The Harvard MBA was gone from the wall. The air smelled of ozone and hot metal again. My things were in a box on the desk. I took out the picture of the founding team and put it back on the wall. I took out Hemlock's silver pen and placed it next to the phone. The first batch of bulkheads was due for shipment in 3 days. I spent the morning walking the floor, talking to my guys, listening to the machines. The beast had a slight tremor in its main hydraulic pump. Its voice was strained. I had them shut it down, and we bled the lines. We found a small air pocket, just enough to throw off the injection pressure by a fraction, an issue no sensor would ever detect. We fired it back up. The sound was right. A deep, steady hum. The language of a healthy machine. We did the first pour that afternoon. I didn't watch the monitors. I stood where I always stood, feeling the vibrations through the concrete. I watched the color of the overflow. I listened. It felt right. When the cast came out of the die, it was perfect, gleaming, flawless. We poured 40 more. Every single one was perfect. That evening, I sat at my old desk with the new title. The stack of authorization forms was waiting. I picked up Hemlock's pen, its weight familiar in my hand. I signed my name, Curtis Swenson, on the first line. My signature was the last step in a long process, a human mark of approval on a piece of technology. It was a promise that the man flying that jet would come home safe. They had the MBA, the data, the Six Sigma manuals, but they didn't have the keys to the castle. I did. Control isn't in the title. It's in the contracts. It's in the knowledge that can't be digitized. They thought firing me was the end of the story. They were wrong. It was the beginning of mine. I went home at 5. For the first time in my life, I left the plant when the sun was still up. When I got home, I didn't go to the workshop. The canoe could wait. It was a project for my time, not the company's. I sat on my back porch, watched the evening settle in, and felt a quiet peace. The work was done. Justice was served. And for the first time, I felt truly, completely optimized. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel,